so much the person that cheated is feeling so much shame and hopefully remorse, and blame, a lot of blame. And so they are feeling very unheard and discouraged, very discouraged. And so that's the other purpose of the book, is to recognize that with some maturity, humility, and curiosity, they can make change. They can get to repair relationships, maybe or maybe not with the person they hurt, but certainly future relationships.
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Our topic for today is...
Okay, I had an affair. Why isn't saying sorry enough? An interview with Dr. Deborah Miller.
Indeed. And she wrote a book which is aimed at the person who did the cheating, not the one who was cheated on, which is, less usual. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And we have finished our interview with her. We went through hell and high water technically, but I think that the quality actually will turn out to be quite good, folks. But, why am I bothering to tell you that? You should have some rahmanas for us. That's a Yiddish word meaning mercy on us for what, and especially for Dr. Miller. She was a real trooper and really helped us out.
Hung in there with us.
Hung in there, came back, redid what we had to redo. So
but I do want to say the name of her book, since we brought her up, which is More Than Sorry, 5 Steps to Deepen Your Apology After You Have Committed Adultery.
Indeed. While we're on the subject of books, why don't we mention some books that I've written?
Yes, we have a couple of books that we want to plug as well.
That's right. They're back there. They're back there, folks.
The latest is Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong.
Yep.
And then there was the original one that started this podcast. It kind of lit the spark. And that book was Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
And let me just say about those two books. First of all, I think they're good books. Well, of course I do. I wrote them. I'm not the only one who thinks that, by the way. Numbers of other people have told me they're good books too. And moreover, what they're, I'm realizing we plug these books and I don't really mention what they're about all the time. That concept of, things are going wrong. If I were going to summarize the one thing that ties it all together, and even the concept of it's not about communication, it's that you're valid even when things are really hard. Both of you're both valid people. When things are going badly, it's because it's hard. It's because there's good reasons why it's hard. You start from there, and then you can have the courage, and I use that word in the conversation with Dr. Miller as well, the courage to look at things being difficult and discover that you can tolerate the anxiety that you need for intimacy. That's really what it's about. It's a lot about learning how to tolerate the anxiety you need to get through some hard stuff. It's not about, a nice, simple program that will easily lead you from point A to point B. Right. It's about recognizing your own validity, and that will give you courage. Or, as we might say, it's about the 7 words: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's what it's about. Anyway, check out those books. And while we're mentioning books, I have 2, I guess I'll call them booklets because they're shorter. They're shorter books. They're under 100 pages each. One of them is called 7 Words to Jumpstart Your Love Life. Now, that book is available on Amazon. It's available as an audiobook. It's available for Kindle. It's available as a paperback. You don't need to buy any of those. What a thing for an author to say.
Yeah, why would you say that?
Why would I say that? Because I'll give you the electronic copy for free.
Free?
If you sign up for my newsletter. So you will see when you go to ctn7.com, that is our podcast website, you will see a little box that says, sign up for Dr. Chalmers' newsletter. And when you do that, folks, you will get free of charge a link to that very booklet, 7 Words to Jumpstart Your Love Life. And the other booklet I've written recently is called My Husband. Go ahead, you say it.
Okay. My husband complains about my cleaning. What do I do? Hint, it's not about cleaning.
Yeah. And that, again, sounds like a very niche book, but there are lots of people who are wondering about that very thing. We get lots of internet searches talking about, my husband's complaining about my cleaning, and what do I do? And it's just these very frustrated women who are trying to figure out how to manage this. It's obviously a relationship issue. It's not, I don't give them, suggestions for what dust mop to get.
No.
So that's not what it's about. So do check all of that stuff out. And I think that'll do us for our intro now.
Yes, I think we should get on with our nice interview with Deb Miller and hear what all the fun, fascinating things I shouldn't say fun because it's a tough topic, but all of the interesting things that she has to say about infidelity.
So we will get on with that. You'll hear Judy introducing her, and we will see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Dr. Deborah Miller. Dr. Miller is a licensed professional counselor who has worked with couples, families, and individual adults and children for over 25 years. She has worked as an educator specializing in the needs of at-risk children, as well as a school counselor. In her work with couples, she has often worked with couples dealing with the effects of infidelity. Her recent book is called More Than Sorry: 5 Steps to Deepen Your Apology After You Have Committed Infidelity. After celebrating 45 years of marriage, she and her husband have joined the caboose generation, moving to live closer to grandchildren. Pickleball has helped the adjustment to semi-retirement. Dr. Miller, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you. Good to be here, Bruce and Judy.
Well, thanks for doing this. I want to, in the interest of full transparency, want to mention to our viewers and listeners, we've been having technical issues today. So apologies to all of you in advance. We're going to find a way of getting this thing made, and we will get it out to you. If you notice funny things happening in the course of the recording, that's just because of technical issues. So having said all that, Deb, tell us, how did you get into counseling couples, and what was your own journey from working as an educator and moving into working with doing counseling and working with couples?
Yeah, my journey started with being a special education teacher, working with at-risk kids, adolescents primarily. And then as I got my counseling degree, I moved into kind of a school counseling kind of role. And then once I got my doctorate, I started my private practice. And, I certainly was advocating and work with adolescents and children. But what happened that people would bring their kids in, push them through the door. And then as we dealt with some of the family issues, realizing that they too, as a couple or as adults individually, also needed to get some therapy. And at the same time, I was doing a pretty intensive 4-year training with Dr. Ed Harris in St. Louis on Gestalt training, and got feeling very comfortable working with couples and understanding that work with a relationship is different than working with individuals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that happened. And then as a consequence of working so much with couples, a primary issue was affairs or infidelity, cheating. Mm-hmm. And so I started that journey and found myself very redundant in what I would say to these couples over and over again, and consequently realized that because there was a lack of resources for a person that was cheating, that I needed to write a book on it. And the COVID gave me the time and space to get that happen, to make that happen.
And it is interesting that, it is very unusual, as you note, to have a book that is aimed at the person who did the cheating. Usually the work is, how do you survive when your partner has cheated on you? But to actually have something that addresses those folks is really very interesting. I'm curious in the context of that, what did you notice? What did you feel? And of course, I'm almost asking you to summarize your book in a few sentences, which is silly because people should read the book. But what did you notice that really needed to be said, or what did you need to help people who did the cheating work on?
Well, so the redundancy was that couples would come in for counseling, and the person that had been wounded, the person that was the victim, the person that was caught blindsided, just really needed to vent and emote and ask questions. And, they needed some attention, and they needed a lot of validation and space to air their pain. Meanwhile, the perpetrator, the person that cheated, the adulterer, would often just sit there silently, head down, mumbling, I don't know why I did it, and I'm sorry, and why are we still talking about it? And it was just kind of a redundant thing. And I recognized that the healing of them as a couple wasn't going to happen unless the person that cheated did some work, did
Mm-hmm.
some, as I call it, navel gazing, some ability to look inward and ask themselves some deeper questions about their why, that they stepped over the line and violated the trust in the relationship.
Yeah, I like that in your book. You have, different sections on journaling where it really gets the cheater to get introspective and goes through the steps that they might not have thought about otherwise, other than, like, I don't know. But you bring up these wonderful topics of to get the whole process flowing and really, to examine their motives and everything else that led up to it in the relationship. So I
Right.
found that
Right.
really
That was the other intention of the book, was that it is a self-help book. Even though I would prefer people work with a therapist, even jointly with the book, the
sure.
reality is that there's not accessibility to mental health in many areas. People maybe aren't ready, they don't have the money, they can't find the right person. So it's a tool for them to actually walk themselves through some steps and encourages them to look deeply, because the reality is we all have a innate ability to look in the mirror and be okay with who we are even when we mess up. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's challenging people to kind of embrace their guilt in a way, to recognize that they did hurt someone, they did mess up, and that they need to own it. But that doesn't mean they can't change.
Mm-hmm.
Things can be repaired. And so that's the other hope, is so much the person that cheated is feeling so much shame and hopefully remorse, and blame, a lot of blame. And so they are feeling very unheard and discouraged, very discouraged. And so that's the other purpose of the book, is to recognize that with some maturity, humility, and curiosity, they can make change. They can get to repair relationships, maybe or maybe not with the person they hurt, but certainly future relationships.
So what makes for an effective apology?
Yeah. Well, it has to start with empathy. In other words, for me to really get how much I wounded you, I have to really get the depth of that pain. And that takes, again, a lot of courage and humility to accept how much you have inflicted on another person. So step one is to understand the power of empathy and how to learn that skill, because it is a skill.
So if you
Um,
don't have it, how do you learn it?
Right. Well, you go to counseling school and you learn. No, I'm kidding. I mean, that is one way we all learned it. This Carl Rogers was like our old guru in the old days, and still is, I guess. I don't know. Who taught us a really simple formula for communicating empathy. But step one is to sense what the other person is feeling, to make guesses about their emotions, and then to articulate it, to validate it. And he would use the kind of simplistic phrase of, you're feeling blank because blank. You're feeling ticked off because I cheated on you. That sounds so simplistic. And yet, to hear those words, it helps the other person speaking go, yeah, I get it. I get it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it just takes a lot of maturity to be able to sit with someone else's pain, especially when you've inflicted it.
Yeah, that's what I always find fascinating, that if somebody isn't feeling valid themselves, that it's very difficult for them to open up to experiencing just how much they hurt someone else, because it feels like annihilation. And we resist feeling annihilated. And I know you talk in the book about the difference between guilt and shame. And when
Yes.
someone is overwhelmed with shame, that sense that they are simply a bad person, not merely that they've done something bad, but that they're a bad person, it becomes almost impossible for them to be empathetic, to actually hear, wow, I need to understand how I've hurt you. Because
Mhm.
that sounds like that is really central to an apology having the possibility of being effective.
That's
It's,
right.
you
Yeah.
have to understand what it is that you've done that the other person's upset about.
Yeah. When you think about, raising children, and I know you've had what, five children?
Between the
Between the
two
two
of
of
us,
us,
yeah.
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 I mean, we all are guilty as parents that, encouraging our kids to say, I'm sorry when you mess up. Say, I'm sorry. And the kid, okay, if I say I'm sorry, it's over with, right? I don't have to talk about it anymore. And so this is saying that's not enough. I'm sorry is nice, but it doesn't really communicate what you're sorry for.
Mhm.
Uh, what it is that you recognize you did wrong, what it is that you hope to do differently in the future. So a true apology, which is what I build up with through the book, that's the last step of the 5 steps, is to really I encourage writing letters that tells more about what it was that they think they were going through at the time, as well as what it is that they understand that they did to the victim, how they hurt them so deeply. And it's just saying more. It's just saying more and being more authentic and more honest and real.
Yeah, something else I noticed about your book, which was interesting, which was you had, was it 5 example couples, I think, that we sort of follow throughout the course of the book, which is, I did a similar approach actually in one of my books too. It really makes it interesting. It's like, ooh, you kind of get to know these people a little bit. And you included quite a diverse mix. And I wanted to ask you something about that because you included, I think it was 3 heterosexual couples and a lesbian couple and a gay male couple. And I've found it fascinating in the course of my work, which is overwhelmingly heterosexual couples, because I'm a cisgendered heterosexual male, and I don't specialize in LGBTQ folks. But over the course of time, I have counseled numbers of lesbian couples and gay male couples. And what's fascinating is, especially from the gay men, what I've heard as a heterosexual man myself, I've had to learn these heteronormative assumptions is the buzzword. The assumptions I'm making that are true largely in heterosexual relationships aren't necessarily the ones that gay men are making, especially when it comes to things like what constitutes cheating, what sort of understanding. Now, of course, the example you gave in your book, the gay male couple you had in your book, it was really clear and you made it quite explicit. Their deal was monogamy. Like, we will not have sex with someone else. And I think the name of the cheater was Bruce, as I recall, which I picked up on. That was before you knew me, I'm sure. Yeah, but it was, that character in the book recognized he was cheating. But I'm curious about that because I've noted that in my work with couples. Every once in a while I'll get a couple where one says it's cheating and the other says, no, it isn't. And that can run quite an interesting gamut. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, let's back up a bit and let me share my definition of an affair. An affair is a secret relationship. It's not agreed upon. And so, nowadays there's a little bit more polyamorous couples who have agreed to let other people be in their primary relationships. That's not an affair. That's not cheating because it's in the open.
Yeah.
And so if in all those cases, the similarity of them, that there was a relationship that the significant other had no clue was happening, or at least the depth of emotional connection that was happening.
Yeah. It's interesting because where that gets, I keep saying interesting. That's what it seems to me. Where it gets interesting is where like your example of the lesbian couple, where the woman was having a deep friendship, which, especially women, not to mansplain to the women in the conversation here, but I've heard from you guys, women do that a lot, even more than men. And it crossed a line, but she could make a case. I think it was Carmen, right? Do I remember that right? She could make a case that she didn't realize it had crossed the line. Right. She then observed that it did. But it was interesting that, those situations of, it's not always clear to both parties that it ought to constitute cheating. Or here's another example. You didn't mention this sort of possibility. I've actually met couples where usually the woman in this case would be saying, if he masturbates and I'm not, if he does that, that's cheating. Right. And then one step further, if he looks at porn and I'm not there, that's cheating. And the guy may be thinking maybe in the porn case, yes, maybe not, but certainly in the masturbation case, probably not. And it's an interesting issue. I'm curious, how do you
those two examples, Bruce, you want to ask the couple, or at least the in this case woman, if the masturbating or porn is getting in the way of their intimacy.
Yeah,
that's what you're exploring. We don't necessarily need to label it as an affair, but it's certainly something that's a conflict in their relationship, and they need to figure out what it is, because the whole reality is, if you triangulate a relationship, if you enter a third party, it gives too much space. It spaces you out from your primary relationship. So if it's a affair partner that's secret, that's going to keep you from being more emotionally open with your client. If you're on porn, it may keep you from being more available emotionally, sexually for your partner also. So
Mm-hmm.
that's certainly the work that needs to happen. And so, yeah, I had one example in my book that was based pretty much on a real couple. I try to make them somewhat fictionalized so no one would recognize themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But the poor couple that, he had had a lifelong porn issue and then tried to enter a marriage. And it was a hard habit. It was a hard addiction to break.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely needed to pursue um, Sex Anonymous groups and really do that 12-step program there. And
Mm-hmm.
his wife was really pretty understanding of it, where the issues would come was when he would sneak and do it without telling her.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, yeah.
And accepting that he had an addiction, but when it fell into the secrecy thing again, that's when the conflict and loss of trust would happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think this may be a good time to
To do our
segue to
listener letter?
Yeah, we have a listener letter for you. We
Okay.
like, as our regular listeners know, we like to, when we have them, by the way, listeners, we can use more letters, by the way, folks. More questions, send them in. But we have this one that is, we think, right up your alley. So that's why we picked this one out for you. So go for it.
Okay, Amy writes, Dear Bruce and Judy, I'm 56 years old and married to Kevin for 30 years. 10 years ago, Kevin had a year-long affair with his coworker. We wanted to stay together for the sake of our children, who were 14 and 12 at the time. We went for counseling and got our marriage back on track, at least for a while. With the kids now out of the house, I'm having trouble connecting to Kevin. We don't seem to have a lot in common, and he isn't affectionate. We haven't had sex in over a year. I think a part of me feels his apology wasn't really sincere. I don't think he'd cheat again, but I keep going over what happened in my mind. I still don't understand how it happened, and I still don't think he understands how badly it hurt me. What should I do? So, what
I'm
advice for
sure.
Amy and Kevin?
Amy and Kevin. Yeah, Amy, obviously you guys need to go back to counseling and try to talk about what's happening. I mean, that's pretty apparent, but it's also reflective of the ebbs and flows of marriage, and the fact that you're going to go through some roller coasters. And when couples come to me, I talk to them about a 4-month repair, because to really intensely try to fix things takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus. And meanwhile, you got maybe kids to raise, or a job to keep, or the grass to mow, or the laundry to do. And it's really easy to just get busy and not focus on each other. And so when I say a 4-month experiment, it's more about what can I do every day to show my spouse that I care or like them. Because what happens over time, especially in a long relationship like that they have, um, resentment builds, and you may love the person, but you fall out of like of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's, how do you reconnect? How do you put some energy into trying? And certainly human instinct is so, well, the other person's not trying, so why should I? But if it's important to you to put out some energy, and whether it's, you know, um, sitting him down to talk, or whether it's dragging him back into counseling. But that what if, I don't know, because that's the second step of my book, is say it out loud,
Mm.
because it
Do you want
gives
to go
us.
through the steps? Do you want to tell us the
Yeah,
steps?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that was the third step. First step is empathy. First step is empathy. Communicating that you understand the pain for them, but also for yourself. The second step is to explore, and that's the navel gazing, how to really analyze yourself in terms of your defense mechanisms, your moral code. There's a whole list. It's a pretty big step, really big step. But the third step is say it out loud, and that's finding a confidant. And it may be a therapist, but ideally there's someone in your world that knows you and loves you and will just do a pretty good job of listening, just to talk about it sometimes.
Mm.
And the fourth step was set restitution goals, make some commitment to what you're going to do. And then that last step is write that letter of apology, and say more than I'm sorry is
Mm-hmm.
the step. But back to the say it out loud. I mean, that's really powerful, because when people come to counseling, especially after an affair, they've never really told their story.
Yeah.
I had an affair. And they're inundated with questions like, where'd you sleep with him or her? Where'd you go out to dinner? How much money did you spend? How good was the sex? There was those kind of questions. But from a non-judgmental perspective, to have someone tell you their story is really powerful for them to hear themselves, for them to look at themselves in the mirror. And I don't know how Amy's feeling about knowing the story, and she may not know it completely, but it is interesting reflection that 10 years seems like that should be another piece of her history, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
the kind of the elephant in the living room. It's just kind of there. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's a big deal, and then other times it smacks you in the face. And right now it's smacking her in the face because she's feeling too distant from her husband. She's
Yeah. They're not
not,
connected.
they're not connected. And that's the piece about intimacy. Certainly physical intimacy is a part of intimacy, but there are other types of intimacy that everyone needs to make sure they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, experientially. How
Mm-hmm.
else do we feel connected to someone?
Yeah,
Um,
I describe as one of my favorite shticks is to describe stability and intimacy as both needs and somewhat in tension with each other, because to maintain intimacy sometimes is scary. It feels destabilizing because to raise, for her to have an intimate moment with Kevin where what Amy says is, I know this is hard, but I'm still not done with 10 years ago. We need to talk more about that.
yeah,
It's interesting when people write a letter like this to us. I usually, I shouldn't assume this, but very likely they're not in couples therapy, because if they were, they wouldn't be writing a
right,
letter to us, And
exactly.
I have a whole section in one of my recent little booklets about how to get your reluctant guy to go to couples therapy. And the
Wow.
reason, the reason the guy is reluctant, speaking as a guy, I have some authority in that realm.
Mhm.
I can speak as a guy. We're terrified, and women often don't realize that we're terrified, but we're terrified because we don't. I don't know Kevin. Probably he doesn't want to lose Amy, and yet he's terrified of bringing up this old stuff. It's going to be painful, and he
Yeah.
doesn't maybe know if it's possible for her to forgive him. And
Yeah.
so, to that, for them to do the kind of work that you talk about in your book is an act of great courage. And
Hmm.
They're going to have to rehash all that
they're
again.
going to have to rehash it to some extent. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing I try to teach couples is, how do you talk about it 5, 10 years later? You
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily want to go back over to how many times did you sleep together, what was your favorite meal? You don't need to get that specific,
Mm-hmm.
but later when it comes up, because it will, it's like all in our culture. You watch any TV show and someone's having an affair, any movie, and it's going to trigger your
Yeah.
own memories. And the maturity and the hope is that you're able to turn to your significant other and say, ouch, you're watching that TV show kind of brought back a lot of young, ugly memories.
Mm-hmm.
And for the other person just to say, I know, I wish we didn't have it in our head, and I'm sorry it sits with you. That's affirming.
I had a
It's not
couple.
a can of worms.
Yeah, just yesterday I had a couple who very quickly were able to do an amazing amount of recovery. Young couple, these are folks in their late 20s. And she had cheated and felt terrible about it. They had been together since they were kids. I mean, like
Mm.
young, like teenagers, young teenagers, they'd been
Mm.
together. And it was fascinating because they were a little worried that they'd recover it as quickly as they had, and they still had a lot of pain about it. But they were at that point, and I don't see this all the time, and I'm always impressed when I do. I've had couples. One of the things I tell in one of my books is a woman who said to her husband who had cheated on her after they had worked for about a year and a half, and she said, "Hey, thanks for taking one for the team." And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "Well, we are so much better off now than we were before you cheated, because clearly there was, I am not saying thank you for cheating, you know, I wish you hadn't cheated, but something had to give. We were headed for a bad end. And I'm
Yeah.
so much better off now, not only with you, this is the woman talking to her husband, not only with you, but with my kids, with my coworkers. I'm so much able to handle things now. And you're the one who had to feel guilty because you did the bad thing. So thanks for taking one for the team." It was a great moment. And
Yeah.
that couple yesterday, they didn't exactly say that, but
Uh-huh.
they were expressing this sense of gratitude. They said, it looking back on it now, I wish we had known where we were headed. But
Mm.
if something like this hadn't happened, we'd probably have broken up miserable. And
Mm-hmm.
now they've gone through a serious crisis, but they're emerging with this sense of appreciation for each other that they hadn't had for years.
Yeah.
And so, there's an element of gratitude that when people have really metabolized what happened, which is a funny way of saying it's like they've digested it,
Well, in some ways they have.
yeah,
Yeah, and
that's what it's about.
that's the
Yeah, go ahead.
fantasy, frozen. Okay.
Mhm.
That's the fantasy is that, and the hope is that after this work, there's a reframe that happens that
Mhm.
says, we went through a really dark time in our relationship and it was horrible and painful. And yet we now are, more intimate, more honest with each other, freer. We've made changes. That's the hope. That's the work. That's what you want to get to. But so many people get stuck in that. Ain't it awful? He or she hurt me so badly. I can't walk away. I can't
Mhm.
let it go. And that's just, sad and it's draining. I mean, what a burden to carry
Yeah.
around with you. That's a lot, a
And,
lot.
and you mentioned this possibility in your book too, and I think you even mentioned it in our talk today. There are couples who heal and break up. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it is interesting. I remember I've worked with couples occasionally where someone will say, I really understand why he or she did it. I just can't be married to them anymore.
Yeah.
Even though I've forgiven them, I'm not angry. I even understand the context. I just can't be with someone who would have done that. So we need to sadly figure out how to still be, good parents to our children or whatever. But,
Right.
that does happen as well. And, I count that as healing. It's not
Yeah.
the
And
one
that,
I would wish, but it
right. Well,
makes
that
sense.
was examples, the 5 couples I gave in my book. You
Hmm.
know, I guess 3 healed, 3 chose to stay together, and
Hmm.
2 did not. One was an ugly split up because he chose not to do much navel gazing,
Hmm.
and they left kind of bitter with each other. And the other couple, yeah, they were able to grandparent and parent successfully as separate individuals, single
Yeah.
individuals. That is true. So much of when we work with people is not really knowing what they come when they come to your office or write you a letter. You're getting a little bit of who they are, but yet they still have the job of figuring out what they want and what makes sense for them. And we have to be very careful as therapists and helpers not to impose our belief system on them. We have to
Hmm.
make sure we let them make their own choices. It's kind of easier to work with adults than it is with kids because kids don't have as many choices, so much
Hmm. Yeah.
independence. Yeah, yeah. So I know. I think this ability to listen and accept the parts of yourself that maybe you don't like is part of this navel gazing. How to accept that you have flaws. We all have
Hmm.
flaws, and how to acknowledge them. Number one, and then number two, see if we can tweak them or make them different. But that has to be said out loud, um, or it's in order to make that kind of commitment, in order to get that kind of feedback from others, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
does.
Well,
Mhm.
tell folks how they can find out more about your book and find out more about you.
Yeah, my website is www.drdebmiller.com. Dr. Deb Miller, DRDEBMILLER.com.
Hmm.
And yeah, there's a link there to buy the book on Amazon if you like. It's very affordable, and just really wanted to put out a resource because it is an underserved population,
Hmm.
and I really want them to have resources if that makes sense. But I did come up with my own 7 words to
Oh, please.
yours, yes, and mine is say it out loud and communicate empathy.
Hmm.
I really want people to, we all have so much strong intuition and so much dialogue going on inside our own heads. And if we really want to be with another person, they need to know most of what's going on in your head. They won't know
I
all
like
of it.
that. Yeah. Say it out loud and communicate empathy. I love the fact that you have to count the word and, just like we do in our 7 words.
No, I was so excited when it came out to 7.
Yeah,
That's right. Have
exactly.
faith, don't panic. I mean, be kind, don't panic, and
And
have
have
faith.
faith.
And
That's right.
you're making me think we should challenge all of our guests to come up with a 7-word description.
Exactly. Yeah.
I hadn't
Yeah.
Of what they do.
This is episode number, I think, 114 or something, and that's the first time I've thought of that. So thank you for
Oh,
noticing that.
came up with that. That's great.
Well, thank you so much for doing
Thank
this.
you,
I mean, again, for the benefit of our listeners, Deb, you really get extra credit for putting up with our technical difficulties today. Much appreciation for that.
Hey, it's the real world here. So yeah, I'm glad we could figure it out. Well,
Thank you.
good luck. You're touching lives. Good for you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Deb. She had a lot of interesting things to say about infidelity. And if you are in a relationship where infidelity is an issue, I highly recommend her book because it really does give you some interesting steps to follow through and to think about and to process. Because, well, as you know, there's so many difficult emotions that need to be processed when that happens.
And I just want to note, especially if you're the one who did the cheating, that's who she's
right. She's
really wrote that
aiming
book
at the cheater. So I know so many books, seem to emphasize how to the wronged person, the cheatee,
so to speak,
the one who was cheated on, how to get through that. But this one really does focus on the cheater. So. More Than Sorry is her book, and contact her.
Indeed.
And we want to put in a couple of plug for a couple of our books, Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. And It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. And as Bruce mentioned earlier, when you subscribe to his newsletter, you get for free his bonus book, 7 Words to Jumpstart Your Love Life.
And you can do that. You can sign up for my newsletter at right from ctn7.com, ctn7, that's the number 7.com, which is CT for couples therapy, in case you were wondering where that comes from, ctn7.com. That is our podcast website, and you can sign up for my newsletter right from there. And when you do that, as Judy mentioned, you'll get the freebie. And I have another book you can find on Amazon as well. Also,
we want to put in a word for.
There's my cup. Yes, I can hold up my cup.
You got it.
There it is.
Put in a word for our merch. Our beautiful mugs, T-shirts, and tote bags that we have with our Couples Therapy and 7-Word logo on one side, and our motto, Be Kind, Don't Panic, and Have Faith, on the other side.
Indeed. And the tote bags, especially, by the way, we use that. We use the cups and we use the tote bags. We don't. It's funny. We don't use the T-shirts a lot. If you like T-shirts,
I don't wear
get
T-shirts.
a T-shirt.
That's
whatever. Yeah, that's right. But in any case, that's all available there.
But plenty of people do wear T-shirts.
They do.
So for those T-shirt wearers,
by golly, go check them out. They're good quality. We made sure of that.
And they're nice. They're attractive.
They're very nice, nicely designed.
And if you have a question like Amy that you want us to read on the air and help you process some of your problems, write to us. You go to ctn7.com and write to us. And if you have suggestions for a guest that you'd like to be on our show, or if you would like to be a guest on our show, you can sign up at ctn7.com.
And so I think we've accomplished what we need to accomplish here.
Well, one thing we still haven't said.
We haven't.
If you are loyal fans and viewers and listeners of our podcast.
See, I knew there was something.
Please follow us, like us, tell your friends, share us, and do all those things that people do on social media to up their listenership. So
absolutely, we would love to welcome more and more listeners, as we seem to have been. We get these weird spikes in downloads. All of a sudden, people seem to be finding out about it, and we're not quite sure how, but we're delighted that they are.
Yes, we are. So
until next time,
remember, be kind,
don't panic,
and have faith.